Hey YouTube, and welcome to my channel. My name is DocHollyHealth. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a personal trainer. I'm certified in prenatal and postpartum corrective exercise and more, but those are the big ones. I am coming at you from my condo, from my living room, and I wanted to talk about how to target those glutes and kind of the why behind it and why I've been exercising for like so many years, but finally in the last like 3 or 4 months, I finally have started to see glute development, and we'll really like dig into all that. I just wanted to introduce to you this lovely doggo, Blue. Hi, Blue. This is my friend's dog and my client, and we're watching it. Braulio and I, my husband, we love dogs. We cannot wait to get one, but we're in kind of process in looking for a house. So right now, this is our situation. We can't really have a dog here full time. And we're both really busy, but once we get a house, we're for sure getting a dog. But every single time a friend or a client or anybody goes away, we're like, we will watch your dog. We love dogs so much. We'll do it for free. So we're watching him for a couple weeks, and then we actually have another dog lined up to watch for 4 weeks after that, and I'm so happy. And they're both pits, and we love pits so much. They're like the cuddliest dogs ever. Why am I telling you so much about dogs when this video is about glutes? Let's get into the glutes. So let's talk about really what makes up the glutes. Like, what are the glutes, what muscles, and what do they do, so you know what exercises would target them. So first of all, you have your glute max, which is the one that everybody thinks of. That's your biggest one. I always say that's like your engine. That should be the strongest muscle in your body. And then underneath that, you have the glute med and the glute min. Those run underneath it this way. And then you also have 6 rotator muscles, tiny glute muscles underneath those 3 layers. There's 6 of them. I can tell you what they are: the superior and inferior gemelli, obturator, internus, and externus. You may have heard of the piriformis. And there's also the quadratus femoris. And you don't really have to worry or remember all of these, but they do more rotation of the hip. Let's get further into detail. We already talked about how the glute max does extension. So what is extension? It's this movement, kicking back. But it's also when your foot is on the floor and you're pushing up. That's extension in the closed kinetic chain when your foot is on the ground. So what movements are those? Stair climbing, sprinting, any type of hinge or squat. When you lean back in that hinge, your glutes are on stretch. And then to bring them back up to standing, that is extension in the closed kinetic chain. That just means your foot is on the ground instead of off the floor kicking back. That would be open kinetic chain. So the hinge movement, what is the hinge movement? That's your hip thrust. That's your RDL. That's your deadlift, to name a few. And then you also have the squat. You can see how when you squat, the bottom of the squat, the glutes are on stretch, and when you stand back up, that's extending back to neutral. So really, anytime you bring your hips back behind you and then bring them back towards center, you're doing hip extension. So that's the glute max. You can think of other movements, more single legs, that would also target this. Here, I'll show you with this leg going back. A lunge, see the stretch and the contraction. A step up, a single leg press. Okay, then you have your glute med and your glute min. So those do abduction, internal and external rotation. So abduction in the open kinetic chain when the foot's off the floor is kicking out to the side. External rotation in the open kinetic chain is taking the hip out to the side like that. And internal rotation is the other way, rotating it back inwards. In the closed kinetic chain, you know these muscles the most to stabilize your hips. So when you're walking, it keeps your hips level. So when one foot's off the ground, you don't get hip drop. So sometimes you see people who have weak glute meds, which is way more common than not, who kind of walk with that hip sink. And some girls might do it on purpose to get a little bit of that booty shaking movement. So you want all these glute muscles You see how when I showed the movements, it's very functional throughout your daily activities, going up the stairs, walking, bending over to pick something up. You need strong glutes. It's critical to have these muscles strong, or else it's going to lead to some sort of compensation. A lot of times people will feel their low back kick in, and that can stress out your back, which we don't want back pain. So the answer is get strong glutes. They look great when they're strong. Who doesn't want to work their booty? I know a lot of us have aesthetic goals, but you also just need it to be human who goes about their day, right? So I already mentioned a few of the exercises that would work the glutes. I'll tell you about the compound movements, which works multiple joints, and it's gonna work more muscles than just the glutes. And then we'll get into the isolation exercises, and we'll talk about tips on how to make them more glute worthy, and then other tips to get glute gains at the end. So stick around to the end if you want all of the tips and tricks. So compound movements, working more than one joint. You have your squat and you have your deadlifts, RDL, and the more bent knee regular deadlift version. Let's talk about how to get these to grow your glutes more. For the squat, what has helped me a lot is getting better depth. The lower you go, the more glute recruitment, because you get the most muscle fibers that have to activate. And also finding the right stance and foot placement has helped me. This will be a little bit different for everybody, because depending on your femur, your leg bone, it's got a femoral head at the top that sits into the socket, which is called the acetabulum. And we all have a little bit different shape, femur head to acetabulum, and depending on yours, you might find a little bit different squat stance than me, so you'll have to play with it. For me, I like to find, you're not gonna see my head for this, but we gotta do what we gotta do. I like to find it a little bit wider than hip width, with my toes turned out. Ground your feet to the floor. You wanna use all four corners of your feet, then externally rotate your knees out. So I don't just start squatting, I physically activate my legs and turn them out. Then you think about your core. You wanna zip up your core from the pelvic floor up. Your core goes all the way from the pelvic floor to your rib cage. Activate your core, screw on your shoulder blades so you have that nice athletic flat back. Okay, so I've got those. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna think about driving my tailbone to the floor, as low as I can, dropping down. And that's my squat. Nice activated core. I've either got a barbell or a dumbbell or whatever weight you have. And then push through your feet and come up into standing by driving your hips forward. All the while, you're pushing your knees out. And then on the way up, I like to think out twice. Push my knees out, out. Inhale on the way down. See how far those knees are out? See how low I am? That'll depend on your mobility. And then exhale on the way up. You see how those glutes do extension with that. So that's your squat. Those are the tips I would tell you. Then you have your RDL and your deadlift. Those are those major hip hinge movements. You can do a sumo deadlift or a regular. If I'm using a barbell, I do a sumo because I have long femurs, so it's a better pattern for me. So I go super wide, and all of these, I turn my feet out a little bit and turn my knees out. You can see how that would turn on my hip rotators and abductors, the glute mid and mean. Turn your knees out, draw your hips back. The barbell should be over the center of your foot, shoulders over it. Grabbing the barbell, you always think about your core, engage your lats, and bring your hips back up. Hip thrusting forward. I went a little too far that time. Don't do that. Just come into standing from there. You don't extra squeeze at the top. You could hyperextend and hurt your back, so you just come from that position on the floor to standing. That's gonna be your deadlift. Same thing for the RDL. Common tips, find your foot placement, a little wider than hip width. Externally rotate your knees, keep them soft. Start with good alignment, shoulder blades back, core tight. Then for the RDL, don't think about bending over, think about bringing your butt back. It's all in the hips if you want that best hip movement. Draw your butt back as low as you can with good mobility. Once you get your hips kind of doing this motion, rounding under, that's too far. Go as low as you can, keeping that tailbone back. That sit bones flaring out, shoulder blades on your back, and stand from there, okay? All of these movements that are compound work more than just the glutes. They're also gonna work your thighs and your hamstrings. So that's when you bring in the mind muscle connection. And the whole time I'm doing these exercises, I literally think, use my butt, use my butt, use my butt. It's just the intention, I swear to you, makes a difference. But no matter what, because you are doing this exercise, your glutes are gonna work. They have to. That's their muscle action. They will work. So with more skill, more experience, you might tune in to your butt more. If you know what I mean. So keep thinking about glute, 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 glute. And that will help the movement as well to target more of the butt. So we also have our lunges, our step ups, our Bulgarian split squats, our leg press. So let's just talk about a few tips as well in the form to get you thinking about the butt with these as well. So any kind of single leg lunge type movement, the more straight up you are, the more quad. Your quad does a knee extension. So your knee is bent now. Extension is when you bring it all the way up. Now the knee is straight. So upright body, more quad. The more you lean forward, you can see how the butt goes on more stretch. And then the more stretched out it is, the more fibers have to kick in to come all the way to standing. So for your lunges, and I like reverse better than front lunges for glutes. For just your regular split squats, hinge forward. Leaning forward is not bad as long as you have a strong core, nice flat back. This is kind of one structure. One structure, you're not like flaring your ribs out or anything like that. You're keeping your abdominal corset tight, your abdominal canister. You want to keep the ribs stacked over the hips, nice long tailbone, voila. That would work for any single leg movement like that. Got it? Drop a comment if you're with me. If this is way over your head, let me know and I can try to clear this up. Also a leg press, you can do a single leg version or 2-leg version. But for more glute oriented and hamstring, you put your foot higher on the leg press machine. For more quad, you put it more like center to lower on the leg press machine. You can also add a band around your knees if you're doing 2 legs. And that's gonna turn on your external rotators and abductors and make it more glute as well. That being said, the band is great for glute. So really any glute activity, you wanna put that, if you want extra side butt, the glute medium in, add the band. You can do it for squat, hip thrust, hinges, which we haven't even talked about the hip thrust, which is like the major one. So let's tune into the hip thrust now. If you've been studying how to work your glutes at all, you have come across the hip thrust and you know that hip thrust is a must. It works the glutes like crazy. It's super isolated, but you're also gonna work your quads, your thighs, and your hamstrings, right? So, hey Blue, what's up, bud? What's up? He's so confused what I'm doing. So this is not gonna be the ideal setup, but I just wanna show you what I'm talking about. For the hip thrust, there's 2 different variations. You always wanna set up your shoulder blades at the height of the bench. The perfect height is 14 inches for most people. That's kind of average. And then you want to basically have your ankle under your knee, about hip width apart. You can also play with where that needs to be. And then I slightly turn my knees out. So they're at least facing the direction over my second toe, or even out further. Once again, you can have the band around your knees. Version number 1 is the scoop. You keep looking forward, and then you hinge from your sternum down. So you're gonna like scoop your hips up, posterior pelvic tilt at the top. That's taking that butt and scooping it under like that ugly butt. You're squeezing your butt like crazy so that your tailbone is like shooting through your knees. So you either have a barbell or the dumbbell on you there. Keep looking forward, and then you're gonna lower your hips back down. If you're using the proper bench, your butt will actually touch the floor again. Or if the bench is a little bit higher, you can do more of like a constant tension hip thrust where you just lower down as much as you can and then go back up into that glute squeeze. A common mistake is not going to full lockout. Lockout is that full squeeze, hips, knees, shoulders are kind of in one line here. Sometimes people will stop a little bit underneath because the weight is too heavy, or they're just not intentional enough about the movement they're not finishing it off because it burns like crazy and it's hard. You just have to do it. You have to be your own motivator and push yourself. The second type is the hinge. You still keep the chin tucked, but it's like more like a fulcrum. So once you get to the top, your back is one straight line, and at the end, now you're looking up at the ceiling. Still squeezing your butt like crazy. This is the prime mover, and then lower back down. So instead of hinging from the sternum down, this whole piece of your back comes up as one unit. Squeeze, 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 and lower back down. Also, sometimes people will either have their feet too far away or too close. So play with that, or you'll go too heavy or too light for the movement. Find the movement where you feel the glutes. But nevertheless, that comes with skill of learning how to have the mind-body connection, tuning in with your glutes, doing the full range of motion, and just knowing the movement better. You can also do one-leg versions or split stance versions, or the KAS glute bridge, where you just kind of do the top of it, which is kind of more like a pulse. Also have your glute bridge, which is doing the same movement from the floor. And this is a little bit more isolated to the glutes. Same kind of cues. Make sure you lock it out at the top. That, I would say, is the biggest mistake for the bridge or the hip extension or hip thrust, is not getting the lockout. Lock it out, push yourself, but not with your ego. Do what you can, find that glute activation, okay? So that's our hip thrust. Quick, show you a variation that I've been loving for the step up. So I've been using the wall and doing like a glute modified step up, which is mostly just the lowering part. So I'll start all the way up, use the wall for assistance. Hold it with the right hand if you have your right foot doing the work. Then you'll have the dumbbell in the left hand, and then you're gonna lower yourself down, keeping the shin vertical by drawing your hips back. Go as low as you can with the mobility that you have. And then from here, you'll do hip extensions. So you'll just think of thrusting your hips back up to standing. Draw the hips back, go as low as you can. Yes, you lean forward. The more hinge forward, the more stretch in the glutes. Boom. That, you will feel your butt like crazy, but any step up is good. So hopefully these tips are helpful. All of the movements that I've talked about so far are compound movements. So you're gonna grow your butt, but you're also gonna grow your thighs and your hamstrings. Now you can also do a little bit more isolated movements too, which is like your standing hip cable abduction, or you can do the abduction at 45 degrees, or kickbacks. You have frog pumps, where you're laying on the floor with your heels together, knees apart, thrusting from there. You have your bridges, which we talked about. Those are more isolated glute, single leg glute bridge, split stance. All the different variations of these movements are great. You have side lying hip abduction, so just lying with an ankle weight or like a dumbbell. You have the standing hip abduction, just standing and kicking the leg out to the side. Maybe you have a dumbbell or a band, and you have all your band activation ones, like, you know, when you see the girls in the gym, you can see, pardon me, do like the donkey kicks, fire hydrants, clamshells. All of those are more isolated, but they're not gonna grow your glutes like a heavy compound movement will do. So sprinkle those in, but you want to be doing the full compound movements to get the best glute development, in my opinion. Checking my notes, there's one more. Forgive me, one more I want to talk about is the back extension machine targeted for the glutes. So that's the machine that's like at a 45-degree angle. You set your hips there, turn your feet out for more glute, and then you also want to have a rounded back for more glute. So you can either hold the plate, or I like to give myself a big hug and round my back forward. That's going to take your back out of it. It's going to put those muscles on slack so that your butt does the majority of the work. And then you hinge up by activating and squeezing your butt like crazy, and then go back down. So that's another just only glute activation exercise. Oh, and by the way, I also love to target the glutes specifically in isolation, the hip abduction machine, the one where you sit down, like the good girl, bad girl machine, you know what I'm talking about. And I like to lean forward. Once again, the more forward lean you have, the more hinge you are, and the more stretch and contraction you get on the glutes. So I love all these movements. Okay, so now what is the perfect formula for a good glute day? Well, I only choose 4 or 5 exercises per day. You don't want to overdo the volume. That's a big mistake I used to make, was doing way too many exercises without progressing them properly, which we call like trash volume. It feels like you're working out and sweating and doing a lot, but it's really not going to get you anywhere in terms of huge glute gains. So what you want to do is you want to pick your priority movement, and this is the one that you're really pushing yourself hard on and progressing intentionally each time, whether you're pushing more weight, more reps, more sets, etc. Your squat, your deadlift, and your hip thrust. Those are the main movements. I do 3 days a week, and I start with one of those for every single time. Then on like the other day, so let's say I do the squat as my main lift, then I'm gonna pick a more hinge movement for my second one, an RDL or another version of the hip thrust, something like that. And then you can do more isolated or single leg movements after. Single leg step up or any of your single leg variations. And then I finish off with some sort of more, once again, isolated movements like the hip abduction machine or any of the cable abductions, the glute emphasis back machine, to finish it